Hello, and welcome to Breath of the West Flight Talk. My name is Pamela,
This is Brandy.
and today we're going to be talking about finding light during tragedies. Brandy, what do you think about when we talk about tragedies?
When I think about tragedies, I think of my whole world crashing down, never to be the same like I know it.
Okay. Yeah, well, I was looking it up today too, and there was actually two definitions, which are kind of similar, but there's a big difference between the two. The first one is, like you were saying, that something bad happens, it changes your world, it changes your life, everything is different after that event in a negative way. And then the other one was talking about it in literature, when there isn't a happily ever after, something really bad happens and that's just the end of the story. But I think there's a big difference between those two definitions, and that is how the story ends. The first definition, that tragedy doesn't have to be the end of the story. There's always a part where, things can get better. It might be a new, different, better, but it's not the end of the story. And today it is Good Friday. And I was wondering, why do they call it Good Friday? In the story of Christ's life, this was the worst day of his life, I would think. His friend betrayed him. His other ones denied him. His enemies had gotten hold of him. They did horrible things to him. He was crucified. I mean, the pain, the agony, the humiliation, the torment, all of that happened pretty much on this one day. And in Christianity, we call it Good Friday. And when I think about, well, why do we call it that? Because it's not a tragedy in a story sense. That's not the end of the story.
Right.
Because really there is no end of the story, except for in the end, everyone gets to live happily ever after in some form or another because of today, Good Friday. And you might think, well, that's great, but I'm a human being. I don't know if I can handle all of this stuff. Because, when we go through a tragedy, have you heard of the phases of grief, Brandy?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I was kind of looking them up, and, there's denial, there's anger, and everything else. But I think the one that people get caught in the most is the depression.
Yeah.
And you have your own little show, blog that you were talking about, and you were talking about how you need to feel things.
Mm-hmm.
You want to talk about how you need to experience those feelings?
I think it's important to go through all the stages of grief, and I've said before that grief, tragedy, it comes in lots of different shapes and sizes. And for my child as a senior right now, she did feel like her world was crashing down the day that she went to her locker to get everything out of her locker. And this day that she's dreamed about all her life isn't going to happen in a way that she dreamed it. And so so when she called me crying, we had just went through an experience with a good friend who lost her son, and so she didn't feel validated in feeling that, in feeling such sorrow for something so silly in her mind. And I just cried with her because, yes, in the grand scheme of things, when you're 30 years old looking back on your high school graduation, did it matter? Well, yes, but was it huge as losing a son or losing a job or those type of things? No, probably not. But to her, it is. And so we just had to go through those stages with her. I am a firm believer that you feel all the feels.
Mm-hmm.
And but then I was going to talk about later, but I'll just talk about it right now, is that it's all about your intention, though, of what you're ready to do next. It's okay. I tell my kids all the times, it's okay to be sad. It's okay to be mad and angry and all those things. Those are okay. Feelings aren't wrong or right. They just are. It's what we do next.
Yes.
That's what matters. And so it's all about our intention. Finding light in a tragedy is all about our intention. Do we want to find light? And how are we going to look for that light? Because it's not just going to happen. it's something we have to decide. And that's why I tell people, ultimately, at the end of the day, happiness is a choice. And I am one that has struggled with emotional instabilities and depression and those type of things. And I didn't like to hear that happiness is a choice, because I felt like I had no choice. But we have a choice, like I said, in what we do next and what our intentions are in finding that light. And we have to search for it. We have to go say, okay, today's the day. Today's the day I get back up. Today's the day that I put a smile on my face and put my hair up and put makeup on. Today's the day I take my kids on a walk. That's what we have to decide. And that's how we find light, is by looking for it.
Yeah, great. That's wonderful. So basically, we just have to remember, tragedies, we're not the storybook tragedies. It's not going to be doom and gloom forever. There is a happily ever after. And that's what we just need to hold on to, that hope. We have to look for it. Sometimes if we're in depression, if we want to stay in depression, we're going to stay in depression, if that's what we choose to do. And it is hard. It is so hard to climb out of that. Because I know you have your guilt, says, I should have done that. I would have done that. I could have done that. And if you keep that mentality, it's just going to trap you. You're not going to be able to find the hope. Because the hope is up there, and you have to climb up to reach it.
I love that. That's
and that is really hard to do.
It goes back again to what's our focus? What are we focusing on? And again, that's not to diminish or take away from our feelings. We don't do that. You don't stop them. You don't stuff them. You work through them. You feel them and you talk about them. But again, it's at the end of the day, what's your focus?
Yeah, because in the end, there's no such thing as a bad feeling. If you think about it, there isn't. They have purposes.
Yes, they do.
Yes.
Absolutely.
But you also have to realize, if you're going to be depressed, you can't stay there.
Right.
You have to. And what's the best way to usually pull out of depression?
I think there's lots of different ways for lots of different people. And for some, that is medicine. And that's okay. Absolutely. And that means that's the day you wake up and say, I'm going to the doctor today. I'm going to find out something else that can help me through this. And that's okay. Sometimes we need something to help us think rationally. Sometimes it is just going outside every day and finding that outside time. Sometimes it's talking to a therapist. Sometimes it's doing more self-care. It just depends. It's different for everybody. And honestly, you don't know what it is. You have to search for that. And you have to try different things until you find what works for you. And of course, lots of prayer, lots of time on your knees.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's all that we have time for today. So thank you for joining us. Thank you, Brandy. You always have amazing insight. Thank you so much. Couldn't do this without you.
For inviting me.
Okay, and we will see you next week. Have a wonderful day. Bye.
Have a good day. Bye.